Hello and welcome to Moral Lit Literary Deep Dives and Discussions with me, A.L. Lieske. I'm joined today again by my husband, Zach. And today we will be going off an interesting topic, jumping ahead a couple chapters. I seem to be doing that lately. But in this passage, we have both passages are exchanges between Azure and Detective Granger. In the first one, they're at Scigliano Manor and they're just kind of chilling. He's very exhausted. Anyways, she asks him a question. He doesn't respond, so she snaps at him. "Not so fun working with me, huh?" She shot back, her tone a bit more biting than intended. "Perhaps you ought to have gone straight to Elma in the first place. Prescott, you are misinterpreting a tired man's words. Someday you might find yourself in a position like mine, and a little compassion could go a long way." His voice was sincere, almost making her feel guilty. "I apologize. Independence was the nature of my previous position. Frankly, the Bureau does not do well to assist with team building skills throughout every department." So that's passage number one. Passage number two. This is, I believe, chapter 19. And he's calling out Azure for why she didn't figure out his position prior to this point and had joined him without knowing it. He said that in the presence of individuals you perceive as superior, your demeanor adjusts and you become quieter, more reserved, noticeably inquisitive. At times I might even say humble. Such is not the case in your dealings with me. From the beginning you approached with ease and critique, which strongly suggests you did not know my rank. Only one other explanation presents itself aside from the curiosity invoked by charm, which of course is his age. What do those passages have to do with anything? Well, the topic is humility. Detective Granger and Azure are, I didn't create them specifically for this, but I've come to recognize that they are very much a metaphor for pride and humility. Azure has a pride problem, and she will probably have it for a while. She's got a spicy nature. I guess actually it's twice in the book that she's called a firecracker. So she is a little bit prideful. Detective Granger, on the other side, is humble. We have to kind of look at definitions of humility, and that's kind of what we're going to explore today is general humility. So by the world's definitions, I mean, I've been kind of looking at the Cambridge Dictionary and Merriam-Webster to kind of see the definitions of humility, and their definitions are spot on, which is what causes me to think that this topic, humility, is where we in the world tend to have an articulation problem. We don't articulate humility the way that it should be. So the way that humility is often articulated is equated more to what I would call lowliness or even meekness. We think that being humble has something to do with being debased, when according to the dictionaries, let me pull up one of these definitions for you here so you can hear it. Merriam-Webster says humility is freedom from pride or arrogance, the quality or state of being humble. Humble can be used to describe what is ranked low by others or as a person of humble origins. People also use the word of themselves and things associated with themselves if you describe yourself as but a humble editor or refer to your home as your humble abode. So it can describe things too. According to Cambridge, humility is the feeling or attitude that you have no special importance that makes you better than others, as in a lack of pride. That is what the dictionaries say. And we kind of look at them and we're like, okay, so absence of pride means I have absolutely no self-esteem, right? And there's this problem in our society where we articulate humility with humiliation. And that's not right. Humility is not humiliation. Humility is, especially for Christians, it's talked about as one of the highest qualities of being Christ-like. So Christ was not a humiliated person. Yes, people tried to humiliate him, but he was not of himself humiliated. So if we're looking at that, then humility does not equal humiliation.
Yeah, looking at those two definitions, it's pretty obvious that humility is the opposite of pride. And I think when we see and describe pride, a lot of us see the negative of an inappropriate amount of pride or an inappropriate nature of that pride, where it derives from. Having pride in your work or doing something that is supposed to help you feel accomplished or proud of yourself or others is quite a bit different than not allowing for criticism or judgment from others to help you come up with a new way of going about doing something or taking on, feedback or criticism. Oftentimes people who mock humility misunderstand that the virtue of that really just means that you are capable taking in the feedback of others, as well as being able to make decisions not solely based upon your own liking or understanding, but you take other people's perspectives into thought in terms of like team building or taking the perspective of someone else when making an important decision with them rather than for them.
That's really well said. So going into the Lattice Scheme, there are these in the first book and then in the second book, which I know the second book isn't out yet, but there's these two very obvious instances where what you're talking about kind of comes into play of not taking in another person's opinion into account, where Azure she's storming forward with what she sees and what she understands. And so Azure, being blessed with this gift of dream walking, she's able to go into oblivion, discuss things with Wagner, and her eyes are open to a bigger understanding. The problem is she doesn't convey that always or very well to those who cannot see that, hear that, or receive that same thing. So, spoiler alert. There's a point where Detective Granger, and she is talking to him, trying to describe what potentially is going on with the bad guy of the entire plot, and he's really slow to kind of get it, and she gets really frustrated, and again and again and again for several chapters forward, she insists that they need to act in a certain way. And so he gives her this lovely lecture at one point about doing the right thing for the right reasons, which will be a podcast in and of itself coming up several podcasts from now. But he does that. And then the second book, we will explore her also doing the same thing, where she's plowing forward, trying to, grab some sort of control, and she's not really considering what other people see or don't see. So that is very much an aspect of pride. To be humble, it's not just about being open-minded. I would not associate being open-minded per se just alone by itself with being humble. You have to be meek. There's a willingness in humility, a willingness to learn. You want to be taught, essentially, what other people see, what other people think. You really want to actually take into account their perspective, not just to know it, because knowledge alone does not equate humility. It's knowledge plus willingness, or willingness to gain that knowledge, to consider it while holding on to your foundations, in a sense. Yeah. So if we look at Detective Granger, we don't know a whole stinking lot about him. That is intentional. But you can kind of observe from his actions throughout the book that he's very solid in the ground that he's standing on. He very much takes into account communicating with others as best as he can. He's very observant of others, and he cares about their perspective. Over and over again, he's very, very aware of Azure's perspective. So that is why I kind of equate him to humility and her to pride. Are they 100% totally prideful or humble all the time? No, they switch back and forth, but that's just the comparison in the Lattice Scheme. So when it comes to humility, is it possible to be humble while being dependent? Is it possible to be humble while being independent? Or do you have to be interdependent? There's a thought. Where does humility lie on the spectrum? Or is it possible to lie on all three?
I think different levels of humility will create a different level of dependence, independence, and codependency on certain things. I think humility and pride are important in many different ways. And when we are able to have a proper amount of humility and a proper amount of pride, it's the difference between never being able to make a decision because we're considering too much of people versus only making decisions that we want and we feel comfortable with versus, and rather than taking any advice at all on something. So when it comes to that independence or that codependence, what comes to my mind is kind of like with us in our marriage. We are both independent in our work. We work separate from each other at our jobs or the things that we do. But then when we come together and we live our lives together, we take care of a lot of things around the house codependently. Sometimes I'll do the dishes, sometimes you'll do the dishes, depending on the needs. That is, I'm never going to say I'm not going to ever do the dishes because that's not what I agreed to or didn't agree to do when we got married. What we agreed to do was to live together as a married couple and to do things together. And so sometimes there are important decisions where you'll weigh in more than I will, or I'll weigh in more than you will, depending on what it is, whether it's buying a house, moving, whether it's getting a new job, whether it's doing the dishes, vacuuming the house, doing whatever, any amount of chores, any amount of responsibility that we share, that requires a certain amount of humility, but also you do need a little bit of pride or confidence is probably a better word for that within yourself to understand. Because I think pride by itself is probably what people get mixed up with when they think of positive confidence. A positive pride would lean more towards what I would say is confidence rather than that. So, but that's where the interdependency is probably the healthiest way to go about it, rather than complete codependency, which is where I think you reach not having that confidence versus having so much pride or confidence that you don't consider other people.
I would definitely say that there is a spectrum of that to consider. I'm going to take an opposite approach even. Mm-hmm. When I look at dependence, interdependence, and independence from a family study perspective, those to me are statuses. And I know the world doesn't always look at them as just statuses because, like you're saying, we equate, pride to confidence. Independence equals confidence equals I don't need other people. Like, that is the way that it comes off. But I would argue that in the light that independence as a status means that I'm able to function alone. Able to function alone doesn't mean I don't need other people. I'm able to function alone. Mm-hmm. There are going to be times that we're independent, that we need to be independent. For example, only one person can drive a car at a time. Yes. Then there will be times that we are dependent on another person. Our foremost thought will probably be like when you're born, when you are a baby, you need somebody to feed you. Yes. But there's also other circumstances where you will not be able to do things that other people will be required to do for you. For example, we all like to go to the grocery stores, and pick things off the shelf. Well, we don't have the ability to stock those shelves unless we work there, which most of us do not. So we need other people to stock those shelves so that we can get those items. We are dependent on other folks in that case. Nobody in this life is 100% independent. I mean, you could argue that the Amish are independent, but technically they're dependent on each other, so interdependence there. But the point being, it is a status. What you're describing about us being codependent, interdependent, likewise the same. Like, there are things that we collaborate on, and that's codependence in our relationship that we have committed to and agreed upon in marriage. Bosses and employees have an interdependence on each other as well. You give me my paycheck, tell me what I need to do, I'll do the work, and it gets done. So those are statuses. As far as humility goes, you can be humble at any part of those statuses. Because if we're looking at independence as a status instead of, an attitude, then what's actually being described normally in the world as independence is either egocentrism or self-reliance. And those are two very different things. Self-reliance has an aspect of humility. Self-reliance is that independent status where I know I can rely on myself. I also know there will be times I need others, but I'm able to function alone if needs be. Mm-hmm. Egocentrism is the independence that I'm a strong, independent woman and I don't need a man. Like, I have a lot of that sometimes, even being married. But they're completely different. One is the humble side or the humility side of independence, and the other is the egocentric side of independence. Mm-hmm. So it can exist. What I'm essentially saying is that humility comes down to attitude. Pride and humility are attitude and perspective. They are not status. Status doesn't determine that. It all comes from within us. You can be humble in the highest circumstances. You can be not humble in the lowest circumstances. I know that because I've been given so many circumstances in my life where I should be humble because I have to rely on others for like my GI issues and other health conditions that I've had in the past. I need other folks to help me with that. I'm very dependent, and yet I've chosen to be very prideful in those times. So status does not equate humility. Something I thought of earlier that I think is kind of catchy. is that so pride includes putting ourselves down as well. Pride is a comparison factor, whereas humility isn't. It's cooperative, collaborative factor. So comparison versus cooperative.
Mhm.
And if we're thinking about that, we have to discuss a little bit into false humility, because the easy comparison between humility and pride is that, oh, pride is only when I'm aggrandizing myself. But false humility, which is also a form of pride, is when you're severely debasing yourself. It's that comparison factor. E.g., I'm not as good as so-and-so. I'm stupid. I'll never measure up. I'm never going to be able to X, Y, and Z. Just putting yourself down for so many things. I'm not as pretty as this person. I'm not able to do this, and therefore I must be useless or invaluable. Anytime that we are putting ourselves down, that's still pride. That's that attitude. An easy way to kind of see it, going back to the whole open-mindedness thing, if you are prideful, whether it be in the aggrandizing state or the false humility state, your view, your perspective is myopic. I see me. I look at me. It turns in on me. Azure, she's very good at seeing other people in a lot of lights, but in those instances where she's going at it with Detective Granger, she sees her perspective. I see me. Whereas humility isn't I see me. Yes, I see me, and I don't discount me. That's humility, is I'm aware of myself, but I'm also very much aware of others. And there's a healthy balance of that. There's the collaboration factor of that.
I mean, you brought up a couple of really good points that I do recognize that there's no such thing as the true dependency or independency in many regards, but and the biggest thing that stands out to me with that is you're right. There are people who are humble, that are completely independent, and there are people that are prideful, that are completely dependent. And that's an attitude of gratefulness versus an attitude of privilege or deserving, and something that kind of irks me, and I try to be charitable towards those who maybe don't show the best attitude in their circumstance, even when I feel like they should. And I know I recognize it in myself. Sometimes I don't have the best attitude, even though I know I should. But it's that desire for something more, and the way that you go about it. There's many things that have been and continue to be said about attitude and what it can do for an individual. But I think that there's a great peace of mind that many people miss out on if they decide that they no longer want to accept all that's going on around them, and then find to be grateful for the things that they have. And it's one thing to be grateful for what you have, but it's another to have a desire to improve and make it better as well. I think there are people that accept their situation, and even though there are parts of them that desire to make change, they'd rather just accept their situation and not make any changes at all. And then in it kind of gives them that excuse to either be less charitable to themselves or others, or even just decide that where they are is good enough. And that could be pretty depressing in my mind, is because for me, I know I don't have everything, but I have the potential to gain and to grow so much more. And I think that is also another part of humility, is if you don't, accepting who you are and where you're at right now is definitely a portion of humility and growth, but it's also could be taken to an extreme where you decide that this is where you landed, and therefore you are stuck in the sand and you can't move forward. And some people use that to embitter themselves. Other people use that to create a drastic amount of apathy for their situation around them.
You saying that kind of reminds me of a model that I've been reading about. There's this couple in our church, the Hafens. I don't know if they're still alive, but they've always worked with this model about the real and the ideal. We have between us these two ends of the spectrum. We have the real, the things that are. We have the ideal on the other end of the spectrum. And then we have what's called the gap in between. And what goes on in the gap is simplicity, complexity, simplicity. They talk about the simplicity that lies on the other side of complexity, which is the ideal. But a metered person has to be humble enough to recognize what is real while still pushing forward to the ideal. And that requires a lot of self-respect, as well as respectability and pressing forward. To be humble, like again, as you're speaking, is not to be so self-focused. You are self-aware. You can be self-reliant, but you're not self-absorbed in that comparison factor of I haven't reached the ideal, or the real isn't ideal, so I shouldn't even try, kind of thing. It's being grounded in what you do have, what you do know, while still having that growth mindset. I would argue that you cannot have humility without a growth mindset, and without, again, that meekness, the willingness to be teachable, to keep learning. Oh man, just had a thought come back to my mind. So, story about me. I was in this dental hygiene program. It was really hard. It was rough. I ended up missing 2 points and getting dismissed. That's its whole own story, can of tuna, that I really don't want to discuss. But part of that program, towards the end of it, I made a lot of mistakes because I was becoming very prideful. I was so focused on being in the gap, not reaching the ideal. I had that pride. I wasn't looking at, like, I knew what there was in front of me to a point, but I was kind of, I was blinded by it. I was blind enough in my own distress of what could go wrong because I couldn't reach the ideal, that I ended up essentially messing things up for myself very much in several ways. And while there was a lot that I was able to turn around and do at the end when I did decide to be humble, like, I lost it because that ground, when we're so focused on the ideal, or we're too focused on the real, or we're too caught up in that gap, we can't stay grounded. We can't stay humble. It's all pride. It's all extreme pride when you're only looking at one end of the spectrum to the other, severities, extremities. That's the problem here. We as humans, we think that pride and humility are opposite ends of the spectrum. We think that on one end, if you are extreme aggrandizing, that is pride. And if you are not, you are humble. Therefore, if I want to be humble, I need to put myself down. Oh, so for example, a part of false humility that I think we all do, I really believe we all do this, is we cannot take a compliment at all. When someone says, hey, I think you did really well at X, Y, and Z, we're like, no, not really. So-and-so did it better. I've had my stepdad has complimented me a couple of times on things that I've done. And in my mind, trying to be humble, I'm like, oh no, it's all the Lord. And, the world will look at that and say, yes, that is humility. And maybe it is in some respects, but it being an automatic reply for me to put myself down and not take any credit whatsoever is pride. And it's hard saying that, but that's the truth. When you can't take a compliment because you don't feel good enough or whatnot, that's because you're hyperfixating on your perspective, and that is pride. Humility says, thank you for noticing the good that I did and going on with it. There's this portion of the Screw Tape letters where the devil he's kind of talking against about the enemy, which the enemy is Jesus Christ, but he's talking about humility. And he talks about how the enemy, which is Christ, would have men actually learn what humility is, which humility is them being able to build a magnificent building, knowing that it is a magnificent building, and still also glorifying in what it does for others and the other people that worked on it. Like, they have a self-esteem in there. But Screw Tape and the devil, like, they are trying to jack us up and have us think that false humility is humility. It's that other end of the spectrum. So that is a real human mind game that's going on right now, is in order to be humble, I have to be humiliated. I have to be debased. I have to be nothing. I have to, sackcloth and ashes means that I'm less than the dust of the earth. There's no worth to me. I'm worthless. And that's not humility at all. Humility knows its worth, but it also, kind of like you're saying, it knows its potential. And it's able to see that ideal and the real and stay grounded in between.
See, for me, one of the things that I do is I'll watch other YouTubers or content creators that talk about, like, how to grow your following. Mm-hmm. And one thing that's been really popular for people to come up and talk about a lot is to not care about subscribers. Like, subscribers don't matter is a pretty huge, I guess, phrase that a lot of people have been sharing around, because technically speaking, with the YouTube algorithm and the way that it works, yes, it doesn't necessarily matter. Subscribers aren't the way that people find you or show their content to you, because the way that the algorithm currently works is it just kind of shows you what you're interested in based upon what you've already watched. So yes, in that regard. But one other thing they also talk about is like it doesn't matter at all. But I think that there's a bit of a misunderstanding with what they're saying. I think a lot of people, even I myself for a while, have kind of thought to myself, like, well, it doesn't matter at all if anybody subscribes to my channel or this podcast or anything, like, but the reality is what they're really trying to do is help you avoid comparison. But the biggest thing to help you avoid comparison is, don't say that your subscribers don't matter, but say that they do matter, but only yours. Everyone else's subscribers don't matter. Everyone else's following doesn't matter. It's the people that you connect with, that you build with, whether it's online or in person. Those are the people that do matter. The strangers that you don't interact with, the person that cut you off on the road, they don't matter in the respect, like, of the amount of attention or time of day that you give them.
Yeah, the weight you give them.
The weight that you give them. The people that try to tear you down and aren't building you up, whether it's in the local, at the local level, or even the international level, whether it's online or in person. The people that you care about and that care about you are the ones that matter the most. And I think when we all look at how other people seem to have their lives better, because we all post only the best online,
don't we though?
But it's that's just it though. It's like if we try to tear down our accomplishments and put it under the guise of humility, then we're really just not giving ourselves really any credit, which demotivates us and makes us become more and more mediocre, rather than choosing to be grateful and humble and excited for the friends we do have, the family that loves us, the people online that we interact with that are good and that do uplift us, and that we can give each other advice and create small interpersonal communities with.
Yeah, man, I love everything you just said. Pride looks at people as numbers. Pride looks at life as a process. And if you're not doing the process, you're not winning. If you're not getting the numbers, you're not winning. That's all pride. And, it sickens me too that, I'm on Instagram and so many people are posting things like, if I get 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, my boyfriend will let me have his credit card and buy all these books. And I'm like, these are people, not numbers. Yeah, there are a lot of bots out there. But there's something inside of me that really recoils when we're looking at people as numbers. I've had 2 jobs in the past that I understand we have to track numbers. I mean, ecclesiastics places do that, organizations do that. Everybody has to keep track of numbers. But the problem is when you start looking at people as numbers and only numbers, not people. Humility looks at people as people first. And numbers are great too, but yeah, it's who are your people? Who are your audience? I would rather have 300 followers who I legitimately know and who legitimately know me than 10,000 strangers that are numbers to me because I don't have the time of the day to actually engage with them like I would like to. Not saying that having that many followers is bad, but it's the attitude, the perspective. Is this a number? Is this a person? Also, like what you said about, who we give weight to. Humility does have that meekness, that teachableness with everybody that you interact with. Like, a huge discounted part of humility is that we as humans are all in the same boat and we all need each other. We do. We're all going to be dependent at some point, interdependent, all of that. That is just the reality of life. But even so, humility doesn't mean that you just listen to everybody and everything goes. there are other elements besides humility in life that require that you prioritize who you give weight to, because some people are looking at you as a person and other people are only looking at you as a number. That's a thing that you have to come to for yourself. It's, if everybody's opinion is affecting me, then I'm going to be stuck between the real and the ideal in that chaotic what is going on forever. You have to be grounded in yourself, have self-confidence, but also see people as people, see the people that matter most to you, ground yourself and weight yourself in those values that actually matter and the people that value you. Going also off of the discounted part of humility, the fact that we as humans are interdependent should help us to be humble in the fact that we're all in the same boat. As in, we all make mistakes. And in making mistakes, there are going to be mistakes that we all cannot replace or fix or compensate on our own. We need other people to help us with that. In fact, there may be some that we cannot fix at all. But the fact is that we're all in that kind of boat, that we're all learning, we're all growing, we're all on this adventure of life together. We're all trying to find an ideal. It might be a different ideal, but we're stuck here on reality, trying to get through the gap, trying to learn humility, trying to get to the ideal. And that should kind of give us a sense of connection, one with another. We're all subject to difficulties, trials, experiences, good, bad, sickness, all of that. Everybody's the same. So therefore, if we are being humble, if we have that perspective of those around us, if we understand that, people matter, but I'm also able to be self-reliant while seeing people as people, it should be a precursor to forgiveness and to understanding. Thinking back about my book, Alma Morales, I think she is like the most incredible character. I could rave on and on about her. But she's been really badly hurt in life. She's been dealt some crazy blows and survived some pretty traumatic things. And slight spoiler, towards the end of the book, Azure is asking her about this one person that essentially forced her to do something that's not only illegal, but it's very inhumane. And she just frankly, she's okay with him just, the law taking it into the law's hands and dealing with him, and her just going on with life. She's got this air of forgiveness in her. And I think that comes from humility. Likewise, later on we'll discuss Granger's mistake philosophy, but that also has a cap on humility. Well, I do have a couple more stories that have a thing to do with humility. Ones that actually popped up in my head this week one popped up in my head this week that I never really realized, just to give another perspective on humility. And so before I give this story, I will say that my definition of humility, because if we're talking about humility, we have to give it a firm definition here, not just the Cambridge Dictionary. But my definition is that humility is a grateful, healthy, and balanced recognition that we need others in life, that we cannot make it on our own, but that we can make it together. And I want to say that is backed by science. Physical health, emotional health, spiritual health, cognitive health, all of that has been shown to require others in our lives. Those people that matter the most, that are closest to us, those people that are going to support us, that matters. So if we can understand, if we can see our support net and be grateful for that and know that with their help we can move forward, that is in essence, a state of humility. So my story. Back when I was in the community college in Cheyenne, I was in this class, most ridiculous class I can possibly say, because it was a college prep class in college. They required the college students to take it. I did not want to take this class because I was in college. This is something I felt you should take in high school. 90% of the class agreed. In fact, the teacher agreed. Nevertheless, we had to do it. So that was that. There it is. Nothing else was going to happen. I'm in this class. It was an evening class. And for the final project, we were put into groups. And from what I can recall, I was in a group of 5. There were 2 basketball players, a girl and a guy who I ironically went to elementary with. There was 2 older adults who were returning to college. One of them was a mechanic of some sorts. I remember that. He was really cool. And the other was an older woman. I don't quite remember why she was going back, but she was very nice, very quiet, very reserved. And then there was me, of course. And So for this project, we were supposed to go about the school acquiring different, things to put into this paper. I don't remember the extent of the paper. I do know that I put a little cultural spin on mine and it was fun, but each of the parts was so vastly detailed as to what we had to do that there was no possible way a single person could have done it alone. And our final grade, which was, it was a huge chunk of our grade. It was ridiculous, the percentage of weight that had. But it was based off of the comprehensive work and paper, the final outcome of the entire group. And he was not going to give us a second chance to do it. It was you pass or you fail. Like, that is it. Yes, there is the ABC and all that jazz. But if somebody in your group misses a part, you can be sure that you are not going to get anything higher than a very low C. That's how big this assignment was. So we got together with our group. We divided. We were going to conquer. Knowing basketball players, we were like, hey, you guys definitely need this grade because you cannot keep playing if your grades are jacked. We know that. They know that, So we thought this group is going to succeed, something awesome. Like, it's going to be a great project. And it wasn't. We put our trust in each other, and, I had this nagging feeling in me the entire next 2 weeks. Even as we would check in on each other, the basketball players, they would keep emailing back very late that we haven't got to it yet. One of them, I remember, was supposed to do something in the library and the other one in the cafeteria. And both of them, they were doing on-site, on-school housing, so they had a plethora of opportunities to do it. We gave them the easiest parts. So in my head, I was like, this is red flag. Something is going to go wrong. But, I had my part to do, so I did it. I gave it my best. The other two did theirs. They gave it the best. And we utterly failed. And I would say we didn't all pass, but what happened was the teacher, he called us all in after hours late on a Friday, our entire group, and we went to this one building. It was, it was really intimidating. It was one of those buildings where all the long tabled conference rooms, and it was like semi-dark, so we're all walking up there nervous, and we're like, oh my goodness, what is he going to say? And he was just going to review our paper with us, is what he said. And we were nervous because, we all saw the grade we got on it. It felt like accountability time. Like, this was judgment day, and we're all sweating because every college student has to pass this class or you will not get your degree, and nobody wants to take it again because that's precious money. So that was on the line. We get in that room, we sit down at the table, he kind of talks to us all, and he says blatantly, who did this part of the paper? This flunked part of the paper, who did this? And we all sat there looking at each other like, it was a team effort, we're all accountable. Maybe I should have done extra. Maybe you should have done extra. Like, that's what was going in our heads. But eventually somebody pointed out that was the basketball players, and they didn't want to admit it. They did eventually admit it. And what was interesting to me was Mr. Miller, he looked at me and the other two that had done our best, and he said, I can tell you did quality work, and I could tell that you did your best. And he asked us if we had communicated about it, and we described our email process, all that jazz. Anyways, he let us off the hook. And he told us that he was going to give us the grade for our portion as if it was the entire group grade. So that was a huge relief. Like, I got a B from that. I was pretty psyched. He was a tough grader. I'm going to say he was a really tough grader. Anyways, for years now, I've been walking away from that with a very prideful perspective in that I can't trust groups. Like, I've had this cankered heart that, most of the groups I've ever worked with, whenever there's specifically jocks and basketball players, it seems like the group always gets let down, that somebody doesn't do their part. That was the stereotype I grew up with, so I was very distrusting of working with groups. But while I was thinking about this the other day, the Lord put it in me that there's a humble way to look at this. And the fact was this: one, aside from the mercy that teacher gave us, we could not pass the grade without each other. There was no possible way to do it alone. So while I'm steaming in my pride thinking I can't trust people, there was no way I could have done that grade on my own. That's reality. The ideal was that everybody would have done it, but they didn't. But all this time I've been discounting the two people that really did do their part, and they did their part very well. And they put their all into it, and they communicated with me. And so I haven't been humble in recognizing that I needed them. They needed me, and we did our part. And so now I have a new perspective from that, is the grateful recognition. I can be humble and realize that, yes, in the light that there was 2 on one side and 2 on the other side, 50% of the group might have failed me, but 50% of the group did not let me down. There's a thing to say about trust there in extremities with pride. Like, you can't say, I can't trust X, Y, and Z because 50% let me down, if you're unwilling to say that I can't trust everybody because 50% didn't let me down. It's a toss-up. But the humble recognition is that the reality was, whether or not pass or fail, I needed people and they needed me, and we did it. So that is a thought on humility. When it comes to Lattice Scheme in general, the reason that I didn't do a solo detective mainly comes down because there's so many solo detectives out there who I love. I really love, like Charlie Chan, Hercule Poirot, Sherlock Holmes, who work very solo in a lot of senses. And there's a little bit of pride in there's egocentrism in all 3 of them, but there's also humility in that they recognize they can't do things alone. One of them, we need to have Hastings. We need to have Watson. Like, we need to have each other. And that's humility, is recognizing gratefully that I need people. I can't do this alone. It's not all about me, and seeing those people for who they are. So those are just some thoughts on humility today as we're going forward with the Lattice Scheme. I hope that you got something out of this discussion. Definitely look at humility as you go about your day, seeing people as people versus numbers, priorities, all of that jazz. Definitely leave a comment if you have anything to add. We would love to hear. Subscribe to our channel. And if you haven't picked up a copy of my book, check out my website, because there are now hardcover copies and there's a discount link on the website. Don't just go to Ingram Spark and buy it. It'll cost you like $30. And don't buy the hardcover on Amazon either. That's like $33. But go to my website and you could get it for $20 or less. So see you next week.